RAILUP, the Future Mobility podcast with innovators and leaders of the ecosystem. Presented by Sebastian Sperker.
My guest today is Erez Abittan, deployment strategist at Palantir, one of the world's most advanced companies in the field of big data analytics. Together, we will dive into Palantir's fascinating ecosystem and explore how their technology is being used in the rail sector. From real-world use cases to innovative projects, we will uncover how data is transforming rail operations. We will also talk about Palantir's unique company culture and what it takes to attract some of the brightest minds in the world. So stay with us and let's talk big data in rail. So, hi Erez and welcome to RAILUP to the podcast. And as you know, I start my question always, or the podcast with the same questions. How would you describe yourself? You're rather an innovator or a leader?
Well, first, thank you very much for having me on the podcast. And, unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that. For me, it's really about the outcome. And whether it's about being a leader or innovator, it doesn't matter. It's about how do we drive the process forward.
Then let's jump into this topic. Today we will talk about one of the golden nuggets of our economy, about data. And massive amounts of data are generated every day, but unless we can integrate, analyze, and apply that data effectively, it holds just a little value. And what we see today, that too many decisions are still based solely on expert intuition or gut feeling. And however, today's increasingly complex world, where we're also facing a growing shortage of experienced professionals, we need to explore a better way to make decisions. And one promising path forward is the smarter use of data. And fortunately, we already have a wealth of it in the rail ecosystem. Every day we're generating huge volumes from the real-time location of rolling stock to timetabling information, gearbox temperatures, or maintaining reports. But this data is often scattered across the systems, purely structured or of low quality. To truly unlock this value, we need to specialize solutions and partners who can help us centralize and refine this data. And that's why today we're speaking with one of the most innovative companies in this space, with Palantir. While many associate Palantir with governmental and defense applications, the company offers so much more, including impactful solutions for the rail sector. So I'm very happy, and let's begin our conversation with Erez. Erez, can you start by giving us a brief overview of what Palantir does and how it connects to the rail industry?
Absolutely. So Palantir, we build leading software platforms for data-driven operations and decision-making. And by that, we mean that we enable the most important institution to drive better outcome, leveraging data and AI. And you mentioned the fact that we're known in the government space, and this is where we started over 20 years ago in defense and anti-terrorism space. But really quickly, we found that the same problem that we're seeing in those domains actually are spread across all major industries. And that's where we work now. And this is a challenge that you have siloed information, that drives siloed decision, that drives suboptimal outcomes. And where does rail fit into that? Well, it's a really, really important sector in our economy. And that's really where we started. In addition to that, you mentioned there's a lot of data. And I would argue that it's the use of data across the industry, across the entire ecosystem of rail and transportation has been suboptimal to this point. And that's where we play.
Palantir offers 4 business domains, and these domains have quite cool names. There is Gotham, based on the Dark City and Batman. There is Apollo, which refers to the moon landing. Then there is API, and there is the Foundry to create a solid item. And I think that's the domain we will talk about today.
It's Foundry and AIP. Exactly. So we have 4 platforms. You mentioned Gotham. This is what's used in our government work. We have Apollo, which is a platform for managing your infrastructure in complex distributed system. And then we have Foundry and AIP that are used in terms of leveraging your information to drive outcome in the operation. And AIP is the AI platform that we add on top of it.
Okay, so we just had a little talking about Palantir, but how did you end up working as a Frenchman in the US and later at Palantir, especially within the rail sector?
Yeah, that's quite niche, right? So I came to the US for grad school. And, the short of the story is that I never left. It was supposed to be a 1-year program that became a 1.5 years, 2 years, and then I started working in the US. So I spent about close to 10 years in the financial services industry in consulting And then I got my green card. I did a couple of startups. And when I was in transition, I discovered Palantir a little bit randomly. A friend of mine told me, hey, you should go talk to those people. And I met a group of really, really smart, talented, and passionate individuals, and I wanted to be part of it. And how Rail, the Rail aspect, at Palantir, we don't have verticals, specialties. We don't, I came in with 10 years of experience in financial services. I did one financial services project at Palantir. And I think there's value in actually coming in with a fresh pair of eyes, right? If you spend a lot of time in one industry, it's hard to change it from the inside. And so we spread our time across industries. We do a lot of cross-pollination from industries. And so my time at Palantir, about half of my time is, and my focus is on rail and transportation. And then the other half is still around other industrial customers and other, I would say, miscellaneous, partnership that we have.
Yeah, and I can imagine that railway guys and engineers have something in common, to be maybe a bit of a nerdish, but super passionate. And that probably can lead to really cool results.
Absolutely. And our engineers, the way we work is we have this concept of forward deployed engineers. And so when we bring our platform to our customer, we embed our engineers in the operation. They do desk side. They want to see how people, they go on site. We visit the shops, we visit the NOC or wherever action or, wherever decisions are being made. We want to see how this is done. And so that's how, we're with our customers at all the layers. And I remember there was this project we did for one of the large class 1 in the US. And the head of railcar safety, after we did a steering committee meeting at, I think it was the 3 months mark. And she highlights how at the end of it, she said, well, one thing I want to highlight is I'm so impressed by how the Palantir engineers now speak like railroaders. And I think in many other contexts, that could be an insult. But actually for us, that's the biggest prize, that our engineers went so deep that now actually we could speak the language of the various operators. And that's really key for, you mentioned the nerdiness and the passion. That's actually who we are. And that's how we work. Yeah.
Yeah, crazy. Let's start with a very simple question about the culture. Like, how was your first day at Palantir?
Yeah, it was quite a while ago. But the first day, it's quite a change, especially when you come from if you've worked in other places. But I think when I see people who join Palantir straight out of college or university, I think they're in a really amazing position. And the reason why it's so different is that we take really smart people and we give them the room to actually think. There's so many places where you have talent to go through university, 5 years of studies after, high school, all of that. And their first job is quite, put people in a box and they have to live within that box. And we do it actually very differently. We want those really smart individuals to actually think through the problems. We don't want them to be told what to do. We want them to think about what they think they should be doing. And then we discuss. Doesn't mean that they are always going to do what they want, but we want people to have opinion on what is the right thing to do and really execute. And the thing is that from our culture, there is our leadership did a really amazing job at building that culture of driving decision to the front line. Who is the person with the best the best view of the world is the person who should make that decision, or at least make the case for what the decision should be, because that person know more than the person who may be viewed as a leader or a person in the center of the organization. And actually our CEO talks about that in his recent book, where one of the ideas, if you look at I'll talk about one of the chapters, is looking at the organization of bees and how when the bees are looking at where to put their nest. It's not the actual worker bees are going flying around and they come back and they do their dance in front of the whole colony, and then the whole colony decide what to do. It doesn't go through layers of hierarchies of telling their senior bees, hey, I think we should go there, and then the senior bees decide what to do. Right? It's about this flat layer, and that's how we operate at the company. And it does a few things. First of all, it unleashes the talent of the individuals, regardless of where they come from, regardless of their tenure in the company. You bring the best from that. And then that also enables that dynamism in the decision making, right? It's the person who is the best position to make one decision should be that person who make that decision. It doesn't mean that they're the best person to make the next decision, right? And so that's another aspect of this flat and dynamic hierarchy. But back to my first day, for me, what was really, really interesting was a lot of the non-value added aspect that you will see in other places wasn't present. There's actually this one thing. So I came from consulting. I worked in consulting for some time. And in consulting, you spend a lot of time building really beautiful slides, millimeter alignments. And I do see, there's a place and time for that. But in my first few years at Palantir, we were making horrible slides, because we are actually shipping softwares, right? Like, that was a big contrast. And that, full commitment to, no, we're not going to spend time on slides because we're going to build software, that non-value added activity was gone. And it was such a breath of fresh air. And this, along with the fact that you push this into the edge, I think creates a unique environment.
I read that for Palantir, approximately 4,000 people working worldwide, and that's also the size what the company will not exceed. And in terms of culture, I read a very interesting quote for Alex Karp, like your CEO. Actually, he stated like our culture is like a cult without sex and just the drugs.
Yeah. I didn't hear that version, but yeah, it's often described as an artist colony. And I think there's something really true in that is we want people to be driven from the inside. Like if I have to tell you what to do and have to, it's not the right place for you. But if you want to drive change and if you're driven internally and you're passionate, and that's a place for you, right? And you need to go check the ego at the door when you come in, because that whole idea of, the learning process, this is an everyday occurrence here, right? Where it's all about evolving. The business is evolving. The way our company was 6 months ago is different than the way it was 6 months before that. And so this continual reinvention requires that kind of people.
But you would say like that you also are the platform for having the best talents on the planet.
It's quite a claim. But I will say, I haven't seen in other places with such an amazing group of people. And I look at the people who worked with me, who have left and what they've built, a lot of really impressive companies coming from former employees. So I would say that there is something that the company is doing really well on hiring and culture. I'll give you an example of my journey for the interview. When I interviewed at Palantir, I remember, so at the same time I've been interviewing to other financial services companies. And in those other places, I'll meet, global head of data in their office. And the interview process was good, but actually it was not intense, in a way that I will talk about my experience and they will see what they like and we'll have a conversation. And that was it. When I did my interview at Palantir, you meet everyone in the company and the questions are very pointed. And it's really about, understanding how you think. It's not understanding what you've done. But and that shift for me was actually one of the reasons I wanted to join the company, is because at the end of the interview, I realized that I learned from it, actually.
Okay, thanks for these insights of the culture of Palantir, and let's talk about the business. So actually, what is the big vision of Palantir and which problems you are aiming to solve, and especially when it comes to the rail sector?
Yeah. At the core of our technology, there is this idea and this belief and this view that to drive better outcome, it's not about just humans and it's not about just machine. That's human-machine symbiosis. And that's really the core of our company. And the problem that we solve is, how do we leverage what machines are good at and what humans are good at to drive this impact at scale? And so the vision for the company, it's about, within an organization or within an ecosystem, connecting all of the pieces of the operation so that things can operate seamlessly. And that's really the core thing, right? When we think about where is the waste in any system, it's, when you look at the seams of those processes where I do my work within my box and it's the best, and you do your thing in your box, but actually once we start to interact, that's where things break. And when you do that at scale, the complexity is quite impactful, and that's what we aim to solve. And this is where, and that translate into various solutions, right? Where now when you're talking about resolving disruption, because we have that connected fabric of the company, we can actually resolve disruption faster. When it's about better outcome or better use of assets, now you can do that. And so but at the core, it's about connecting the various actors of an enterprise or an ecosystem to drive better outcomes together.
Yeah, and taking the decisions, as you mentioned before.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that also like in our pre-talks, which are really like the approach, AI helping humans taking decisions and not focusing just that AI works with AI properly, right? It's at the end of the day also human-centric, let's put it that way.
Exactly, and it's all about leveraging data to make it actionable, right? Like, and you mentioned this problem that we have so much data in the rail industry, but how much actually can you use to make decision? And that's the gap that we're feeling.
Absolutely. And not just massive amount of data, we have a massive amount of silos.
Absolutely.
So silos where they're stored. Yeah? And I don't know like too much about the other industries, but at least it seems to be that the rail ecosystem is quite good in producing a lot of silos where the data then is stored. Just to talk a little bit more about the rail sector, and can you just give us an overview or some customers and describe some real world business applications what you already have in use?
In terms of customers, I won't go into specific names, but I will give at a high level. We work with half of the class ones in North America. We have other participants in the North American rail ecosystem, railcar leasing companies, railcar manufacturing companies. We work
and you
with
can read it up
in
the internet anyhow.
Yes, exactly. And you can, and then we have partners in Europe in the rail ecosystem. We have a big partnership in Australia as well. So we have those strong relationships, and the workflow that are being used in this space. It's all about this complex orchestration of decisions. And this is because one thing that, if I step back for a second, a lot of people are looking at AI and saying, well, what is the ROI of AI? And the challenge there is that everybody's looking at AI. If you look at a lot of the marketing literature out there, it's about, saving time on some task. And the challenge is that you cannot put a dollar value. If you save 2 hours in your day, nobody's going to put a dollar value on that. And therefore you have no ROI. Yeah, you have a slightly better quality of life. That's great. And we should argue, how much, of investment in time do you get to get these 2 hours, saved, per week. But nobody's going to put value. But where unless we're talking about, large scale operations, where now if you have 10,000 humans doing some task and you can save 2 hours a week, now that maybe that changes, right? And now you can have, but in the context rail is one of the example where it's heavily industrial, where the return is coming from the assets. And so the value of AI, how do you drive ROI? It's about better return on those assets. How do you produce some output with less assets being online? How do you get more from the life of the assets? Those are the key themes. How do you, instead of having a plan that's built for your average asset, how do you build an individual plan for every asset and orchestrate that so that the decisions that are being made, where it's not just looking at the one silo, I need to optimize, the maintenance for that locomotive, but what if it's about, I need to optimize the maintenance across my fleet of locomotive, right? And so now that's where you get the outcome. And so to your question on, specific example.
But Erez, for 1 second, I think that's a really nice and good point. Because whenever normally you're talking about AI, maybe also in other industries, it's heavily related in, okay, I can reduce stuff, and I can do this fast, etc. But you're absolutely right. At least in a heavy asset industry, like it's all about to utilize the asset in a better way, and this has nothing to do really with cutting of stuff. It's just let the assets run in a better way.
Exactly. And because AI is not free, you have to pay for it, right? And so when the cost that, you need to have some significant result to offset the cost. And that's where we get them. And so the example of the workflow that we're doing when we think about driving these outcomes at scale. So for instance, track maintenance we have this partner, they run an automated railroad. So tracks, thousands of line of tracks in a loop, if you will. There's no train schedule. How do you manage maintenance of way windows, right? You cannot look at your schedule and find the time. You actually have to dynamically calculate those based on when the trains are running, because they run autonomously as soon as a train, as soon as all the rail cars are filled, the train leaves the terminal. And so that's, one of the example. But actually, this is just one piece. The other piece is that now I know when I can make, repairs on the tracks. But every time you do repairs on the track, you need to have the right equipment. You need to have the right personnel with the right qualification, the right material. Everything needs to be at the right place. You ship everybody maybe 100 miles into this remote area to do that repair. Somebody falls sick. How do you handle that? Right. So first there is a scheduling aspect of let's see when we're going to do our repairs. But then obviously something happens and you have to change that schedule. And so that's where our software comes in. First, to do that initial schedule, how do you optimize that? And then when you send your crew 100 miles, west, for instance, what are the other things that maybe now they should be doing some proactive work, because the cost-benefit analysis of doing a preventative repair or an inspection that's due in 30 days, I'm not going to send somebody specially for that, but if they're so close, maybe I should do that. And that's what the software does. And then when conditions change, somebody falls sick, the part didn't show up on time at the dock, whatever happens where now I cannot perform this maintenance, what is the next best thing I should do? Right. And maybe it's about rebuilding the whole plan. Maybe it's something else. Right. And so, this is one example. And we're doing similar things. There is a problem that we have various level of rollout in different places, but it's about wheel management and wheel change management. And when you change wheels on a rail car or a locomotive, there's always this idea. It's kind of the same idea, right? It's about when should I change the wheels? When I change the wheels, should I change all the wheels? Should I change just a subset of them? And I'm mentioning that because when you have a fleet of 100,000 rail cars, when you have a fleet of 5,000 locomotives, those costs actually add up to significant dollars. And this is one example. From those are two examples from how do you run your asset better, but then there is also how do you run the business better. And then, the other type of example that you do in the logistics space, so the rail logistics, for instance, where you have a lot of, and that's another area, you have so much emails and phone call. That's something that's so exciting about the rail space is that, from the outside, it may seem like the industry hasn't evolved over, the last pick how many years. And in some aspect, it's absolutely wrong. It's not the case. It actually changed quite a bit. But in other, it's still, how do you move a load from point A to point B? You have to call at some point, somebody is going to send an email, or maybe many emails. Somebody is going to make some phone calls. And those seams in the operation between the different participants, that's actually one of the areas that we're tackling. But because now you can leverage with generative AI and putting it in production with the right guardrail, because that's actually a very important part. When we think of generative AI, there's so much potential. The demos are very easy. The actual production workflows are hard, because when you're working on something that matters, you cannot rely on the randomness of the output to say, well, 80% of the time it's going to be good. You actually have to protect the time where the 20% is not going to be good. How do you handle that? All of that. So, but now by putting those models in production, we can actually streamline those processes where now you can have actual agent that handle those human to machine communications. Instead of having humans playing phone call, you can have agent reaching out to the humans and getting the information, or even better, you have agent talking to agent on the other side. And what it means now, coming back to the ROI question, the idea is not about the time saved. I have my buyers that are calling, the suppliers to know it's going to be shipped on time. I have 100 buyers. They used to spend a lot of time doing that. Now I don't have, do I reduce the team of buyers? Maybe, but maybe not, because actually now they can actually do the real work that buyers should do. They shouldn't be spending their time emailing, right? But the value that you have that now you can better orchestrate across actors. And one of our partners, they actually use our platform for that. They build this agent that runs an advanced shipment notice network. And the value that they got from them, the way they see the ROI, it's from the increase on-time delivery. The fact that it went from the high 80 to the mid 90s, for them that actually is worth a lot of money, because now the production schedule that's tied to that delivery of material now can run better. And this is just another example, but all around rail logistics, you see those gaps between processes, and in a way, now you can make email all the way companies solve that is with IDEs or all kind of like integration, and it's working fine. But the bandwidth first is limited. The flexibility is quite bad. Every time you want to change something, it's actually an actual development project, and then the cost of doing that is quite high. And so building those connections is not something that is done systematically. But now you can actually use email as this universal API, if you will, where now your software can actually connect with every organization in the world. Now, I will say that would be the level 0. I would prefer deeper integration, but between no integration and that email-based, you see significant value coming from that.
What I stated at the beginning already, I mean, like we do have in many industries really the upcoming shortage on experienced professionals, right? And basically, if it's just like a phone call between one and the other, and we assume that you don't record this phone call, then basically all the knowledge or the conclusion or the decision what they take, it's more or less, you cannot reflect on them, right? It's just gone, and therefore, like if more and more people are going retired, then suddenly you're missing just one process out of the chain, which is maybe a very crucial one.
Yeah, and that's. I want to expand on that, because when I was talking about this human-machine symbiosis, core, component of how we're bringing our software. Some of the big challenges that I see in the transportation industry, one, and we should talk about that, it's service, right? That all of the inefficiencies we're talking about, at the end of the day, it's how do you increase service, right? That's the next big value, driver for the industry. The other one, and you mentioned it, it's the fact that you have labor shortage, and especially you have talented and experienced employees we're going to retire. We're retiring, and we're going to retire in greater numbers in the years to come. And they have all of this knowledge. And how do you capture that? And those two aspects that I'm talking about, the service and the fact that you have this knowledge that is, we call that trouble knowledge. What people have done, I've done this job for 20 years. I know everything. And I, it's not documented anywhere else. And the way we actually solve that problem is when we talk about that human-machine symbiosis within a process. When we think about the example of the example of track maintenance, there are many versions of that workflow. There is the I'll call it the first version, which is you have AI getting suggestions for the human on how to handle the schedule. You have the next version where you start to actually capture the feedback. So the AI is suggesting multiple options for the human to choose. And then we capture what is the selection that the human has made in that specific case. And we look at the cases where the decision they made, the decision they did not make. And that's actually, we can capture that back in terms of the feedback loop to better improve the model. And over time, as you're getting all of the edge cases, if you will, of all of the places where the humans decided something else, you anchor that into the system, and so you get to a place where actually quite comfortable. Now you can actually run some aspect of that operation fully autonomously. And then you can, as you get more comfortable, it's almost like a dial. You can, put more automation, if you will. But the thing I want to highlight is that feedback loop on how you capture that knowledge. What we found is that very often you have standard operating procedures that document how decisions are being made. But the people who have done the work for 20 years, they actually they add to that, but it's in their brain, right? And the way they change, where they have those new layers is because they got burned, right? They've done some decision in the past, and it didn't work. And usually when you're a mission-driven operator, you made you're out, it didn't work for you. Well, you know what? You're going to work harder. You have to work harder to fix it. And so it's in their interest to actually capture all of that knowledge. But the thing is that there is no system for them to share that easily with their peers. And by bringing our software where we have that human-machine interaction, where the human actually provides feedback on those outcomes, now we're capturing that into the system. And now actually in the short term, you actually capture those, what are those standard operating procedures? What are the actual standard operating procedures that people follow in the ground? Not what's in my PDF somewhere. And that's really a key thing.
Yeah, and you will have the same on the process level. I mean, there are the written processes, but very often people in the organization are using much more the informal processes to solve a specific problem. And these problems are captured nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. One of the interesting things in the rail industry is that there is this, I will call it a myth, and it's but a lot of the railroaders think, but if we're going to make a perfect plan, and if the operations is going to follow the plan, everything is going to be great. And there is this belief that should be how things are. And obviously, it's a great starting point, but we have to realize that the plan is never working as intended. There's always something that's happening. And so the next layer is not just about how you make a better plan, but it's about how do you adapt as the reality evolves. This idea that there's a plan and it's going to work, and not we should spend more, effort on how to manage deviation to the plan than we should spend to the plan. I'm not saying we should spend less on planning. We should spend more on handling those deviations. And to your point in terms of the human in the loop, is that the humans have been handling those deviations all the time, right? It's like, oh, I cannot run this operation, or I'm going to do this tactical move. But the thing is that all of those tactical moves that the operations have been, operating team have been running to adapt to the deviation in the plan, they've always, most of the time, they're based on people's experience, and they're not based on data. And when I talk about data, really what I mean by that is the full context of the current, the current operating landscape. What is going to happen? And based on where the different assets are and where they're coming and where they're living, this is the thing that should be informing the decision, as opposed to the historical knowledge and the anecdotal data. That's because it's based on what they can have access to easily. Yeah.
Oh, that's a wisdom sentence, to focus more on how to handle deviations rather than to focus on the perfect plan, which we know it's matching rarely to the actual reality. He also mentioned that Palantir having the picture that decisions on top level is a result of many, many decisions which were taken on other level. Or in other words, all the small decisions having an input to the big ones.
Exactly. And the one way we can see a company, right, it's a sum of decisions. And maybe, from a visual way, you can think every decision is a tiny vector that's going in one direction. And the sum total of all of those vectors, that's the direction of the company, And so what it means is that every one of those matters. And so the alignment between where we want the company to go and where we want, or the organization to go, and when the individual decisions are, it's critical, right? Because we want everything to push in that same direction. And this is the core of our platform. We're focusing on operational decision and how do we get more value from it, but also how do we drive the alignment across the operation. That's, that's global optimal. It's coming from everybody pushing in the same direction. And the way we do that, just because this concept, I don't think it's not, it's that necessarily novel. I'm sure a lot of people think about that. But the question is, how do you make that happen? And that's where, from our technology standpoint, we have a different approach. And at the core, without going too deep, but at the core, there is this layer that we call the ontology. And the concept of an ontology is something that has been known and used in computer science for decades, but nobody really invested there. And what it means is really that representation. It's a digital representation of the real world concept. And if we think of most of the technology systems, whether it's your various tables in databases, your various models, if you do, or any kind of rule-based engine and so on, or any kind of like action system like your ERPs, all of those, they live in their own silos. They live with their own nomenclature. You may have 17 tables that talks about a shipment. you may have 25 models, about how you manage crew optimization in different setup, right? And all of those things live in separate areas. And what we do is we combine all of that into that layer that cleanly align those resources to the concept that they connect with. So, for instance, we may have 17. We can take the 17 table about our shipment, and we make that into a shipment object, and we connect that to the customers and all of the different layers that we care about. Maybe that shipment is going to be on a rail car, and that rail car is going to be on a train. And building that high level view, and for every one of those assets, you have that 360 view of the data. You have any kind of model that they have associated with that. So maybe if I have my shipment, I can have all of that information in one place, but I can also have the model that we have. Maybe if we have an ETA models, I can connect that there. And if we have any kind of system of action, anything that relates to how do I act on that shipment? Maybe I want to roll that shipment off to the next train, for instance. All of those systems, you connect that into that ontology layer. And that's what enable, because now everybody is working on that digital representation of the real world. Now you can have the different teams aligning their decisions. Because when I'm going to make my decision on one part of that ontology, you're going to see that on your side, and it's going to impact the way you're going to make your decision. And now we can we can get the global optimal, if you will.
Yeah. If we talk the difference, because you're European living in the US, is there a big difference how in the two markets are innovation or the driving of innovation is seen or is progressed?
Yeah.
Well, what is your personal experience in that?
I think there's more that connects U.S. and European rail sector than divides in many ways. So the first trend was 200 years ago. 200 years ago, 200 years old tech that has been broadly working for that long. And so what it does is that I think it creates a strong resistance to change. Right? If I've been running my business for 200 years, who are you to tell me how to do it differently? And I understand, right? They've been successful, and I think that what it does is that for everyone who wants to provide suggestion or ideas on how to change the industry, it raises the bar because there's just so much noise, and they've heard so much right over 200 years that the net new idea may not resonate again. That's where I see a lot of similarities between the two areas. Where I see some differences is in terms of the dynamism. I think I see in the US and North America more broadly, there's a much more pragmatic response to new ideas. Where it's about, let me explore it, let me test it out, and if it's working, I'm going to double down. And so this cycle is going much faster in the US. In Europe, the decision around innovation is, I would say, a lot slower. And I think that's maybe more, and it's not just, I think, in the rail industry. It may be in other places as well. But that's what I would say. I think from an innovation standpoint, it's really that the baseline is there's a broad resistance for resistance to change because the industry has been successful for so many decades and centuries. But at the same time, there's still the fact that, and I think that could be coming from, what are the funding sources? Who is funding who is paying for the tracks? Who is spending, who has to respond to shareholders? And that drives perhaps a little bit of the change.
Absolutely. I mean, two things come to my mind right away. First, there is a fundamental difference between Europe and the US when it comes to the rail sector. In the US, the most of the rail industry is privately owned, and while in Europe, much of the infrastructure and even the major players actually are state-owned. And I think that makes a huge difference in how risk and innovation are handled. And you're absolutely right. In Europe, many of the big railway companies have recently celebrated their 150th anniversary, and those speeches brands like Apple or other tech giants went mentioned as examples of what didn't exist back then. And yet these rail companies are still around. And I think there is a deep pride in so long history, which is understandable in some ways and admirable. But from a critical perspective, I think this pride can also slow down innovation. And the US and Europe simply have different approaches to innovation and risk. I mean, you can see it in the numbers of startups, the amount of venture capital investment, and overall the mindset. And for example, when a 100 million rocket from the US space company explode after the launch, the reaction is usually, that was a successful start. We collected valuable data and learned a lot. Let's keep on going. And in contrast to that, look at the recent case of ESA Aerospace, a newly founded European space company. They launched the first orbital rocket from mainland Europe, and the rocket lifted off successfully, flew over 30 seconds, and then the mission was terminated. And yet, the media headlines read, European companies fails to reach orbit.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes back to the same idea of, you can have the best plan, it's not going to work. And so how do you adapt to that evolving plan? How do you learn from the thing that didn't work so that you can make better decisions next time? And you need to have, and so, you mentioned the rocket, this is, maybe a longer, cycle of, decision and impact. But when you do that in an operational context, you need to have a platform for that. That's really the hard thing, is how do you have a platform that can evolve and capture that feedback in a very dynamic way?
Absolutely. And in terms of data between US and Europe, because sometimes you might the feeling that in Europe with the GDPR, it's very difficult really to share data and to make the best out of it. Do you have any take on that?
Yes and no. What I mean by that is, GDPR adds some constraint on how you manage data, but actually it's a good thing because any private data is something that we should handle carefully, but even more when it's about citizens and humans, right? But at the same time, I see that as it raises the bar for we have to make better data system, right? If your data systems, for example, at Palantir, we've been looking at data privacy, security, access control for a really long time. When GDPR came into the world, was it like 2018? I think, if I remember well. The building blocks to build systems that were compliant with GDPR was something we already had in our platform that we have been having for years, because of our focus on handling data properly. And so I don't see that necessarily as a technology challenge. It's more, I think, the willingness to build a bigger pie for everybody by sharing data, but across, partner with an ecosystem. But I would say we have a really, really successful ecosystem with Airbus called Skywise that's based in Europe. And, you have all major airlines on that platform, that share data with Airbus with, a lot of granular security and control so that they only share what they want to share, and that enable Airbus to provide new services to the airlines. So this actually is happening in Europe, right? And so I don't think it's necessarily Europe versus US divide. I think it's more, the ambition of the vision that the different partners want to have. And in transportation especially, I think there is room for a lot more data sharing across partners. The current infrastructure provides a good starting point, but I think we need to go much stronger, because if we go back to what is, in the US, what is existential potentially for the railroad is how do you compete with the truck deliveries, right? Especially if we think of what if you have autonomous electric truck? How do you compete with trains? There is always a lot of efficiencies from metal to metal contact versus rubber to but at the same time, if you the advantage could potentially erode. And so how is the railroad going to respond to that? It needs to be coming from better service. And how do you get better service? It's by providing better alignment across the different partners. And how do you do that? Well, data sharing, right? That's and collaboration. And that's one thing from if I look at our product roadmap, I mentioned the ontology being the core aspect of our platform, and we're investing a lot behind that. And it's not rail specific, obviously; it's across all industries. There's one capability that I'm really, really excited about, and it's called Foundry peering. And what it does is that it enables two different organizations who who run on our platform to selectively share object in their ontology with other partners. And so you can think of it as, if I have a shipment object in my ontology, now I can enable you to collaborate on that object with me. Or if I'm building a locomotive or a rail car, I can give you, I can, as you deliver the physical good, I can give you the digital ontology object instance with everything that relates to that asset, as opposed to a bunch of PDS, so that you can have that structure that now you can use in your ontology to grow. But that's coming back to that collaboration. That's going to be key in the years coming to be able to compete with the trucking business, but also, and I see that as this is how you're going to have a higher return for the shareholders, because the investment in building new tracks or new terminals are humongous, right? And so how do you get more from the investment that you already have? And that's going to be that next layer.
Absolutely. And basically talking also about the future, as we care about the future, like what is your take, like which role AI plays in the future in rail, in your opinion?
I think it's going to play many roles. The main one is I see rail as the master orchestrator of, when we talk about, like, if I go back, what will be, we're talking about services key for the rail industry to compete with other alternatives and to provide and to adapt with the need of other businesses, right? If you want to run a tighter supply chain, if you want to better manage disruption, the world, we've seen that over the last 5 years. How much volatility can you have in your supply chain? You need to manage that better. And so at the foundation, it's about how do we solve that? We need to run a carefully orchestrated ballet, if you will, like the way the sector runs right now, where every participant is running on their own. And then the SIMs are quite chaotic, right? Whether it's interchange in the US, whether it's, local traffic going into a terminal, all of those aspects, this is where the plan, I won't say break, but this is what's putting pressure on the plan, is the fact that, you have this volatility. And so at the end, we need to get that a much better orchestration. And that's where I would see the biggest role for AI is how do you orchestrate those decisions across various actors in a way that makes it a win for everyone in the ecosystem. And obviously, I would see other roles, right? How do you leverage unstructured data in a way that is actually useful? How do you leverage, we talked about the feedback loop with, there's, we use AI for that as well. How do you make better decisions? But at the higher level, I see that as that orchestration layer across organizations.
Okay, and if we just envision like the railway in 2050, which picture you will have in your mind?
It's step function improvement on service driven by data and AI. That's, coming back to where you studied that conversation, right? There is a lot of data that's being generated, whether it's from the asset, from, the pure operating aspect of the asset, whether it's from the shipment, whether it's from the network, whether it's from, the full ecosystem. We need, between now and 2050, I'm not saying I wish, it's like we need a step function improvement on service. And what could it be? I don't know how developed it is, but in the US, I would say the most impressive supply chain and is the Amazon network or the Uber network. And I would say Amazon or Uber for your rail freight. That I think what we will get to in 2050, because that's what the industry needs. Clockwork synchronization across those various actors.
Yeah. Clockwork synchronization for rail. That sounds like a great future for rail. And actually, that's, I think, some perfect closing words for this insightful episode. So, Erez, thank you so much and welcome to the RAILUP Club.
Thank you so much, Sebastian, for having me. Really enjoyed the conversation.
What's the takeaway from this episode?
My key takeaways are Palantir is helping the rail industry move from gut feeling to data-driven decision-making by breaking down data silos and turning complex information into real-time insights. Their platforms Foundry and AIP show how AI and humans can work together, not to replace people, but to support better decisions at every level. We have heard great examples from optimizing track maintenance,
and real changes to improving logistics through smarter collaboration. What also stood out, in the US, innovation tends to move faster with a fail fast, learn fast mindset, while in Europe it's often more cautious. But both have valuable approaches. And last but not least, Palantir's culture, mission-driven, flat in hierarchy and focused on hiring brilliant minds who are encouraged to think deeply and act with purpose. It's about to connect the right people to shape the ecosystem of rail, and that's RAILUP.
This podcast connects innovators and leaders worldwide to shape the future ecosystem of rail. RAILUP by Sebastian Sperker.